Today we're working on Lesson 7 of Module 4, Replacing Letters with Numbers. So before we start the lesson, we're just going to go over some formulas that you're going to need. Most of them should be a review, but I would like for you to have them in your notes. So first we're going to go over the area of a square. Area of a square is side squared, that's an S, kind of looks like a 5, I know, or side times side. So if we were to look at a square like the one in our example, one side is 5. So what we know about a square is that all 4 sides are equal. That means each side is 5. So the area of that square would be 5 squared, or 5 times 5, which is 25. Area of a rectangle is length times width. So L times W is how you'll see it. What that means is length times width. Our example triangle has a width of 3 and a length of 7. So area is 7 times 3. Our area is 21. Notice we're not putting any units. Obviously, if it were inches, it would be inches squared. If it were meters, it would be meters squared. We could write units. That would probably be a good idea. And then maybe write the squared. That's important because we need to make sure we know the area is always squared. Volume. The volume of a rectangular prism is length times width times height. Now this is one you may not have gone over before. So we're going to make sure we have this in our notes because we'll be doing it today. Tried to draw a prism. So prism is a 3-dimensional figure, more like a cube. So length is 6, width is 2, height is 8. So the volume would be 6 times 2 times 8. And so the answer to that is 96. The volume is 96. Now, because we're multiplying 3 different things for volume, this is going to be units cubed. So if it were inches, it'd be inches cubed. If it were feet, it would be feet cubed. So area is always squared and volume is cubed. Perimeter should also be a review, but just remember that perimeter of any shape or figure is adding all sides together. So you may have a figure that doesn't just have 4 sides. For example, this rectangular prism. But no matter how many sides you have on a shape or figure, for perimeter you're adding all the sides together. So if we had a perimeter of this rectangle, we wouldn't just add 7 and 3. We'd have 7 plus 7 and then 3 plus 3, and we would add all 4 of those together. So just remembering that perimeter is adding all sides together. Once you finish these notes, turn to lesson 7, replacing letters with numbers. You can pause the video now, get that out, be ready to go. Lesson 7, replacing letters with numbers. So in example 1, we're just going to kind of go over area of a square, and notice they've broken the square up into units so we can easily see what length and width would be. So the first question says, what is the length of one side of the square? Well, obviously we see it's 1, 2, 3 units, and remembering that a square is equal on all sides, so we're going to put 3 units. What is the formula for area of a square? We just went over that. So area is side squared. So what is the square's area as a multiplication expression? So that means we write out what side square would look like. For this one, it's going to be 3 units times 3 units. So the square's area is going to be 9 units squared. So this says we can count the units. However, look at this other square. Its side length is 23 centimeters. That is just too many tiny units to draw. What expression can we build to find this square's area? So obviously we're not going to try to draw 23 little tiny squares to be able to find the area. On this square we could have counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So on this one, obviously that's not something we're going to be able to do. So we know we just need to use that formula that we know and that multiplication expression. So area equals, I know it's side squared, so that's 23 centimeters times 23 centimeters. So if I'm going to work this out, I can do 2-digit times 2-digit. I can also use my calculator. So since we're doing this example together, I'm just going to use the calculator on my phone. I'm going to take 23 times 23, and the answer is 529. So area is 529 centimeters squared. Okay, turn to the next page and you'll see it says, how did you arrive at this answer. So if we're looking at this question, actually, hold on just a second. Let's look at exercise 1. I think my lesson got mixed up a little bit. So you probably have exercise 1 next. Complete the table below for both squares. Sorry about that. So let's look at both squares. We see this one has a side of 4, and this one has a side of 25 inches. Well, here's what we know. We know the area, let's remind ourselves, is side squared. So length of one side of the square. So we're just going to fill in this table so that we have it filled in correctly. And we're going to put length of one side is 4 units. And for this square's area written as an expression, so that's just 4 units times 4 units. And then square's area written as a number, 4 times 4 is 16. So it's 16 units squared. You could also write it as square units. You could write the word square. So to complete the table for this square, that has the side of 25 inches, doing the same thing, pause the video and then check your work. Okay, so the length of this square, under length of one side of the square, you should have 25 inches. The square's area written as an expression is 25 inches times 25 inches, and the square's area written as a number, so the answer to that is 625 inches squared. Example 2. So notice example 2 now is going to show us a rectangle. And we already talked about what we know about a rectangle is that it has length and width. So it says, what does the letter B represent in this blue rectangle? And this rectangle is blue. So what they're asking is, if this side is 8 centimeters, what would letter B be? Okay, well hopefully you said B equals 8. Good. So if we look at this, and I know this says with a partner, but look at and answer this question. Given that the second rectangle, this rectangle, is divided into 4 equal parts, what number does the X represent? So I'm going to make this rectangle a little larger. And if we look at this, we see that 1 unit is 4 centimeters. And they're asking us, X is these 2 units together. So how much would that be if we know that each one of these represents 4 centimeters? So what we should know is that these 2 together are going to be 4 plus 4, which is going to be 8 centimeters. So X, scroll back down to under the question, X equals 8 centimeters. Because it's 2 of these sections together is what X represents, so it would be 8 centimeters. Okay, so now we should be at that question that says, how did you arrive at this answer? So in other words, what did we do to do that? We added 4 plus 4 equals 8 because X represents 2 units. So if X represents 2 units and 1 unit is 4, then X is going to be equal to 8. Okay, so it says, what is the total length of the second rectangle? Well, I'm going to pull that paper back up here so we can see it. So if I look at this rectangle and I need to know the total length, I know that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, and I know that each of those sections is worth 4 centimeters. So I can either count by 4s or I can multiply 4. So 4, 8, 12, 16, or I know that 4 times 4 is 16. So the total length is 16 centimeters. If the 2 large rectangles have equal lengths and widths, find the area of each rectangle. So what that means is that 8 centimeters is our width and 16 centimeters is our length. So again, 16 times 8, that's when we should be able to work out over here to the side. 2 digit times 1 digit. 6 times 8 is 48. By 8, carry my 4. 8 times 1 is 8. Add 4, 128. And remember, we're still doing area, so it's 128 centimeters squared. This table has length of rectangle, width of rectangle, rectangle's area written as an expression, and rectangle's area written as a number. So what I would like for you to do is complete this table for both rectangles. Notice here, On this one, they're giving you the length and the width. Here, you're going to be counting the units to find the length and width. So this first one would go in the top row of the table, the second rectangle, the bottom row of the table. So work on those, pause the video, and then check your work. Okay, so the top row, 7 units is the length of the rectangle. This rectangle here, if you counted it out, you would have had 7 squares. 4 would have been your width. 7 units times 4 units is how it's written as an expression, and then the area is 28 square units. So remember, you can write it as square units or units squared. 46 meters was the length of this one, 32 was the width. 46 times 32 is 1,472 meters squared. Let's continue looking at the lesson. Look at example 3. So example 3 has that volume of a rectangular prism, like we talked about, length times width times height. This is actually the example that we had in our notes. And you see that it has 6 centimeters as its length, 2 as the width, and 8 as the height. So remember, this time we're going to be multiplying 3 numbers to find the area. So what does the L represent? It represents length. The W represents width. And the H represents the height of the figure. Okay, so since we know, and we talked about in our notes, the formula to find the volume is volume equals length times width times height, what number can we substitute for the L in the formula? So what they're asking is, if we're going to use this formula, length times width times height, then we have to know what numbers to substitute in to be able to find the area of this rectangular prism. So the number that we know would go in for the length would be the 6, because it shows us here that the length is 6. So 6 is the length. What number can we substitute for the W in the formula? It shows us that the width is 2. So we're going to write a 2 down here. And then if we turn the page, it asks us what number can we substitute for the H in the formula. So when I look back at that, I know that it's going to be 8. Okay, the height is 8. So determine the volume. So then we have to plug those numbers in. So volume is length times width, just rewriting the formula, times height. So our volume is 6 was our length, times 2 was our width, times 8 is our height. I know that 6 times 2 is 12, and I know that 12 times 8 is 96. If I don't know that, I can work that out over here or use a calculator if I have one. And remember that when we do volume, it's always cubed, so 96 centimeters cubed, because we've multiplied 3 different things, length, width, and height. So work on this table in exercise 3 to do the same thing, length, width, height, write as an expression, find the volume, and check your answers when you're finished. Okay, so for this rectangular prism, you would have 12 units, 5 units, and 15 units are your length, width, and height. 12 times 5 times 15 is 900 units cubed. For this rectangular prism, 23 was our length, our width was 4, our height was 7. 23 times 4 times 7 is 644 centimeters cubed. Okay, if you finish this, you need to bring your work to Mrs. Corey. Come show your work to me. And then when you have done that, and I've looked over your book as well as your notes, you're going to be doing number 1 and number 2 on the problem set. Both of those are a must. On the back of the problem set, number 3 is also a must, and number 4. So notice number 4 asks you to find the volume of the prism. You don't need, it doesn't show it drawn, it just gives you the length, width, and height, and then you use your formula. 3 asks for perimeters. Remember we talked about that. Number 1 asks for area, and number 2 asks for area. So again, on the problem set, you're doing all 4 problems and then turning it into the inbox. Make sure you show me your work to get the problem set.